In 2025, America watched as a young startup founder faced justice for one of the biggest financial deceptions of our time. This is the story of Charlie Javis, the woman who convinced the world and one of the largest banks on earth that her startup Frank could change the future of student finance. But behind every dream was a number, and behind every number, a lie. Written and narrated by Criminal Echoes. Subscribe for more real-life crime stories from the USA and UK. Every generation has its dreamers, and every dreamer has a moment when that dream turns into something darker. It started with an idea, not a crime. In 2016, a young woman named Charlie Javis, only 24 years old, sat in a cramped New York apartment with a laptop, a notebook, and an obsession. How do you make college affordable for everyone? She called her idea Frank, short, simple, honest. A name that promised transparency, a name that meant truth. Charlie had grown up believing she could fix what was broken. She'd studied finance, watched friends drown in student loans, and told herself, if the system won't help us, I'll build one that will. And for a moment, it worked. Her startup gained headlines. Forbes 30 under 30. CNBC feature. Investors said she was brilliant. A visionary. Students wrote to her saying Frank had given them hope. In those early months, it wasn't about money. It was about belonging, about proving she was one of the few who could stand against the machine. But the startup world doesn't reward honesty. It rewards numbers. And numbers don't have feelings. The pressure started small. Investors asked, how many students use your platform? What's your growth rate? And every time, the answer had to be bigger, bolder, better. Then in 2021, the call came that changed everything. JP Morgan Chase, one of the biggest banks in the world, wanted to buy Frank for $175 million. Imagine that. A 29-year-old woman being offered a life-changing deal. The kind of money that turns a founder into a legend overnight. Soft heartbeat sound. Tension begins. But behind that glamorous headline was something invisible. A decision that would define her forever. When JP Morgan's analysts asked for Frank's user data, the proof that millions of students were actually on the platform, Charlie realized the truth. Frank didn't have those users. Somewhere between the dream and the deal, truth had become inconvenient. And so, a lie was born. According to federal prosecutors, Charlie and a small team created fake data sets, falsified emails, and inflated user numbers to convince JP Morgan that Frank had over 4 million users. In reality, it had only a fraction of that. But no one at the bank doubted her. Her confidence, her charm, her story, they were bulletproof. So, in the summer of 2021, the deal closed. Charlie Javis walked away with millions in her personal account and a shiny title. Managing Director at JP Morgan. For a few months, she lived like every dream had come true. Luxury hotels, boardrooms filled with suits twice her age. Her story was being written in headlines. A young woman beats the system. But every lie leaves fingerprints, and sooner or later the truth catches up. JP Morgan's engineers started noticing something odd. Email addresses that didn't work. Accounts that never logged in. Students that didn't exist. At first, it looked like a glitch, then it looked like a pattern, and then it looked like fraud. An internal audit began quietly. No one was supposed to know. But inside corporate walls, whispers spread. Did Frank fake its users? What they found was devastating. Entire spreadsheets of fabricated names, synthetic data linked to nothing real, and signatures that didn't match. JP Morgan had paid $175 million for an illusion. And once the illusion cracked, so did Charlie's world. In 2023, federal investigators launched a criminal probe. Charlie Jevices was charged with bank fraud, wire fraud, and securities fraud. Crimes that could put her behind bars for decades. Silence for 2 seconds. When reporters found her leaving the courthouse, she didn't look like a villain. She looked like someone who still couldn't believe the dream had collapsed. "I built something good," she said once. "I didn't steal anything. I just exaggerated." But exaggeration is how most crimes begin. Not with greed, with pressure, not with evil, with ambition. And that's what makes this story so tragic. Because Charlie Jevices didn't start out to lie. She started out to prove she mattered. Soft piano returns, fading out slowly. In a world that values success over truth, she learned the most expensive lesson there is, that one false number can destroy everything you built. And maybe, the narrator whispers, that's the real price of the American dream. Every empire looks perfect from the outside, but the higher you climb, the quieter it gets, and the harder it becomes to hear your own conscience. After the acquisition, Charlie Jevices walked into the skyscrapers of J.P. Morgan Chase as if she'd conquered Wall Street itself. For a while, she believed she had. Employees remembered her first day. The bright smile, the green notebook she always carried, and how she told the staff, "We're going to change the way students see money." But behind that confidence, there was something no one else could see. A constant fear that someone might check the numbers too closely. She wasn't just managing a company anymore. She was managing a secret. The illusion of success. Inside J.P. Morgan's glass-walled boardrooms, Charlie became a symbol of youthful innovation. Executives proudly told the media they'd acquired America's fastest-growing financial aid startup. For months, she sat in meetings beside men twice her age, explaining how Frank had helped millions of students apply for aid in minutes. And every time she said millions, her voice shook slightly, just enough that she hoped no one noticed. But the illusion had momentum. J.P. Morgan's marketing team built ads around her story. They filmed her walking through college campuses, talking about equality, opportunity, hope. She looked like a hero, and maybe a part of her still wanted to be one. Then came the meetings, rows of suits asking for data reports, growth forecasts, student engagement stats. Each request felt like a blade. She would open her laptop at night, staring at the spreadsheets. The fake users, the ones she'd created to make the deal happen, stared back. And she realized something horrifying. To keep the lie alive, she would have to keep lying. Her small team, the engineers who'd once helped build the platform, were now being asked to do the impossible. Clean the data, make it look real, patch the illusion. At first they hesitated, then they remembered their paychecks. Money has a way of silencing doubt. Charlie would walk into the office with coffee for everyone, smiling, pretending everything was fine. But every night she'd go home to her luxury apartment and check the news, praying no one had found out. Just one more quarter, she told herself. One more report, one more update, then it'll all make sense. But secrets don't age well in a world built on data. It started with an email. A J.P. Morgan analyst ran a test email campaign to the 4 million supposed users. Almost half bounced back. At first they assumed it was a technical issue, an error in formatting. But after several tests, the numbers didn't change. That's when the question started. Why are so many accounts invalid? Where are the engagement logs? Charlie wrote calm replies. We're updating our systems. Some schools have changed their email structures. But deep down, panic was growing. Her assistant recalled seeing her in the office kitchen one evening, staring at her phone with tears in her eyes. "It's not supposed to happen like this," she whispered. By 2022, the illusion was fading. Internal chatter at the bank grew louder. Someone had tipped compliance. "There's something wrong with Frank's data." The investigation began quietly. They cross-checked lists, verified identities, and matched records with student databases. What they found looked impossible. Names that didn't exist, account with duplicate IDs, email domains linked to nothing. And then one afternoon the call came. "We need you to come in, Charlie." When she entered the conference room, the air felt heavier. Her manager looked pale. Two people from legal sat across from her. They slid a printed report across the table. When J.P. Morgan Chase filed its lawsuit in 2023, the headlines exploded. Startup founder accused of defrauding J.P. Morgan in $175 million deal. The lie behind the college aid dream. For the first time, the world saw the woman behind the brand, not as a visionary, but as an alleged con artist. Charlie's defense team painted her as misunderstood, a young innovator crushed by corporate greed. But prosecutors had emails, invoices, and internal messages showing how the fake data had been created. One document read, "We need 4.265 million unique student records. Make sure they look realistic." It wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate fabrication. Still, in the court of public opinion, some sympathized. They said, "She's not Bernie Madoff. She's a victim of pressure, a system that forces young founders to fake it till they make it." Maybe they were right. Or maybe they were just afraid to admit how fragile truth has become. In the months after her indictment, Charlie withdrew from the spotlight. No more interviews, no social media, just silence. People close to her said she spent her days at home, rarely leaving except for court hearings. Her parents supported her quietly, even when the world called her a fraud. And in private, she told friends, "I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted to build something real." But by then, the damage was irreversible. The students who trusted her felt betrayed. Investors lost millions, and one of the world's largest banks was humiliated. In many ways, Charlie's story isn't just about one person's downfall. It's about the culture that made her possible. A world where growth at all costs became the new morality, where startups were measured not by what they built, but by how fast they could pretend to succeed. Charlie Jevices became both symbol and scapegoat, a warning to every young entrepreneur chasing headlines instead of honesty. "If you can fake it," someone once told her, "you can make it." But no one ever said what happens after you make it. It was a cold March morning in Manhattan 2023 when the agents finally came for her. Two black SUVs, no lights, no drama, just quiet efficiency. The doorman at her building said she looked calm, almost numb, when they cuffed her hands. "She didn't say a word," he recalled, "just looked down, like she already knew this day was coming." Inside those few seconds, the story of Charlie Jevices, the dreamer, the founder, the fraud, reached its breaking point. At the FBI field office in downtown New York, Charlie sat under bright fluorescent lights. Across from her, a folder thicker than a textbook. Inside, emails, data reports, transaction histories, fake user lists. The lead investigator, Agent Rodriguez, was calm but relentless. "You built Frank to help students," he said. "But somewhere along the way, it became something else, didn't it?" Charlie didn't respond. She kept staring at her hands, the same hands that once built her empire with a laptop and a dream. When he slid a page across the table, a spreadsheet titled Sample User Dataset, 4.2165 million. She looked up and whispered, "That's not how it started." But in the eyes of the law, how it started didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what she did to keep it alive. Within hours, headlines exploded. Startup founder Charlie Jevices arrested for $175 million in fraud. The young woman who fooled J.P. Morgan Chase. From Forbes 30 under 30 to federal custody. Every news anchor had the same tone, part disbelief, part satisfaction. Because in the end, people love a fall more than they love a rise. Behind the scenes, the investigation unfolded like a web. The FBI traced every document she'd submitted during the acquisition and discovered that Charlie hadn't just inflated user data. She'd allegedly paid a data scientist to create millions of fake student accounts using real-looking names and email formats. That's how she built her illusion. Each name was a ghost, each record a lie made of code. Investigators also found internal emails between her and Frank's former chief growth officer. One line stood out: "We need to make the data look more organic. J.P. Morgan will never know." It was damning. And yet, to those who knew her personally, it didn't add up. They remembered the young woman who stayed up nights answering student emails, who cried when she heard stories of kids losing scholarships. So what happened? What turns a dreamer into a deceiver? Maybe it wasn't greed. Maybe it was survival. The kind that lives inside the pressure cooker of Silicon Valley. The internet split in two. Some called her the female Bernie Madoff. Others said she was just another young founder crushed under impossible expectations. TikTok filled with clips of old interviews where Charlie smiled, talking about helping students. Twitter threads dissected every sentence she'd ever said. People zoomed in on screenshots of her LinkedIn profile like detectives. She looked so normal. You'd never think she could lie like that. Maybe she believed her own story. And maybe she did. Because when ambition becomes identity, the truth becomes negotiable. The day her trial began, reporters lined up outside the courthouse like it was a movie premiere. Flashes, cameras, microphones. But inside, the silence was heavy. Charlie walked in wearing a dark gray coat, no jewelry, no smile. Just the weight of her choices. The prosecutor opened with a single line. The defendant sold a dream, but delivered a deception. They presented evidence like a puzzle, each piece connecting to another. Emails, payment records, fake databases. Then came the moment that silenced the room. An FBI digital analyst testified, showing how the data had been generated using algorithms. He pointed to the screen. This database was created in under 48 hours. Real students don't exist like this. Charlie kept her eyes forward, emotionless, but inside she was collapsing. When her lawyer stood up to speak, the tone shifted. He didn't deny the data was fake. He explained why. Charlie Jevices was 29 years old when a billion-dollar bank wanted proof that her dream was real. And when she couldn't deliver the numbers they demanded, she created them. Some jurors looked sympathetic. Others didn't blink. Because while her story was tragic, her actions were clear. After court, she stopped giving statements. She no longer argued innocence, she just wanted silence. A friend later told a reporter, she said it felt like watching her own obituary in real time. Every article, every comment, every meme, each one a small reminder that her name now belonged to the internet. At night, she couldn't sleep. She'd scroll through old photos, university lectures, team meetings, smiling faces of interns who believed in her. She whispered to herself, I wasn't supposed to end up like this. In April 2024, the Department of Justice formally charged her with bank fraud, wire fraud, and securities fraud, each carrying potential decades in prison. J.P. Morgan's lawyers called it a betrayal of trust at the highest level. Her defense called it a mistake born of desperation. The judge called it what it was, a calculated act of deception for financial gain. And with that, Charlie's freedom slipped away. But what makes this story hurt the most isn't the money. It's the faces of the students who trusted her. Kids who'd filled out their details on Frank's website believing it would help them get into college. Single parents who thought they'd finally found a way to secure financial aid. All of them became part of her lie, even if they never knew it. One student, interviewed later, said, I used Frank because it felt real. I thought she understood what it was like to be broke and scared about the future. But I guess she didn't. And that's the tragedy. She built something meant to help, then destroyed it, trying to make it look perfect. The story of Charlie Jevices isn't about greed or crime alone. It's about the fragility of truth in a world that demands perfection. How many young founders fake success just to stay alive? How many tell small lies that grow too big to control? Charlie's story is a mirror, not just for entrepreneurs, but for all of us. We live in a time, the narrator whispers, where illusion is currency and honesty is a liability. And maybe in some twisted way, Charlie wasn't trying to deceive. Maybe she was just trying to belong in a world that punishes failure more than it rewards truth. By early 2023, the walls had finally closed in. What started as a billion-dollar dream was now turning into a federal nightmare. Charles Jevices, once the youngest billionaire who fooled J.P. Morgan Chase, was facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Prosecutors said she'd faked the very heart of her company, inventing over 4 million fake student accounts just to make her startup look bigger, more powerful, more valuable. When J.P. Morgan bought her company for $175 million, it seemed like the ultimate success story. But in truth, it was one of the biggest corporate scams in recent memory. The FBI raided her apartment, seized her devices, and questioned her team. Her smiling photos, once on magazine covers, were now replaced by mugshots on every news site. Former employees said they'd watched the truth unravel, line by line, inside spreadsheets that never added up. It wasn't just numbers she faked. It was trust. And when trust breaks, everything falls apart. In the end, Charles Jevices stood in court, no longer the tech prodigy or the girl who beat the system. She was just another face behind the glass, charged with defrauding one of America's biggest banks. Her story became a warning, not just about greed, but about how far ambition can go when conscience disappears. The same system she pretended to fix became the one that finally exposed her. And as the courtroom emptied that day, someone whispered, "Dreams built on lies don't last. They collapse, one truth at a time."